Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a case that really gets you thinking. The murder of 7-year-old Joan D'Alessandro.
Oh, yeah, this one, it's a tough one.
It happened back in 1973. And what makes it so disturbing is that the killer, Joseph McGowan, was like a regular high school chemistry teacher. Seemingly normal life.
Right, totally average guy, at least on the surface.
Exactly. And to really get inside his head, we're going to be using John Douglas's book, The Killer Across the Table.
Douglas is the expert, right, FBI profiler.
Yeah, the legend. He really dives deep into McGowan's personality and what might have driven him to do this.
And it's interesting because it wasn't Douglas's typical serial killer case.
Oh, right. McGowan only killed once, as far as we know.
One-time crime, but still absolutely horrific. So it really gave Douglas a chance to, well, analyze what makes someone snap like that.
Yeah, like what turns someone who seems so normal into a murderer?
Right, exactly.
So, okay, let's start with the crime itself. It's 1973. Joan is going door to door selling Girl Scout cookies.
Classic suburban scene.
Right. Totally normal. And tragically, she ends up knocking on McGowan's door.
He was home alone, and from what he said later, it wasn't planned at all.
Really, he just, snapped.
That's what he claimed. He lured Joan inside, assaulted her, and then strangled her.
God, that's just awful. Hard to even imagine. And then it gets worse.
Yeah, instead of, I don't know, turning himself in or something.
He tries to hide what he did.
Right. He drives Joan's body all the way to Harriman State Park, tries to hide the evidence.
So he was thinking clearly enough to try and cover his tracks.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it makes it even more chilling.
Totally. But the police were on it pretty quickly.
They focused on him right away. Last person to see Joan alive.
And he confessed.
He did. Under pressure, he admitted to it and led the police to where he'd left Joan's body.
So we have this guy, seemingly average life, and then this explosion of violence.
Right, and that's what Douglas wanted to unpack, like what was going on in his head.
Douglas talks about this idea of pre-offense fantasies. Like, maybe McGowan had been thinking about hurting someone for a long time.
Yeah, that's a key part of Douglas's theory.
But how could he know that? I mean, it's not like McGowan just came out and said that.
Well, Douglas was really good at reading people, picking up on subtle cues.
So he saw through McGowan's act, like, he wasn't fooled by how McGowan presented himself.
Exactly. You know, McGowan tried to play it cool, like he was just this rational, scientific guy who'd had a momentary lapse.
But Douglas saw something darker underneath.
Definitely. He pointed to McGowan's history. Angry outbursts, inappropriate behavior, even with his students.
Wait, so there were already signs that he couldn't control himself?
Exactly. Like these were little cracks in the image McGowan was trying to project.
And the pre-offense fantasies, they were part of that. Like he was already mentally going to those dark places.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, having these kinds of fantasies doesn't automatically make you a killer.
Right. I mean, lots of people probably have dark thoughts they never act on.
Exactly. It's the combination, the fantasies, plus other risk factors like impulsivity.
So with McGowan, it was like all these dangerous things coming together.
Right. It made him a ticking time bomb, in a way.
And that gets to the core of Douglas's work, right? Profiling. Figuring out what makes someone like McGowan tick.
Yeah. Trying to understand how someone so seemingly normal could commit such a brutal act.
So what did Douglas find? Like, what stood out to him about McGowan's personality?
One thing that really struck Douglas was McGowan's complete lack of remorse. Like, he seemed more worried about how the crime would affect his own life.
Wow.
Yeah, no real sadness for Joan or her family. Douglas describes him as cold, manipulative.
Just thinking about himself?
Absolutely no empathy at all.
Isn't that like a classic sign of narcissism?
It is. And Douglas saw that in McGowan, too. This huge sense of entitlement, like he was smarter than everyone, could charm his way out of anything.
So he thought he could get away with it.
It seems that way. Couldn't or wouldn't accept responsibility.
God, that's scary. So we've got narcissism, no impulse control, no remorse. This is not a good combination.
Yeah, Douglas paints a pretty disturbing picture of McGowan's personality.
And I'm thinking about the people around McGowan, his community. This must have been a huge shock to them.
Oh, totally. It rocked their world because he didn't fit the profile of a typical predator.
He was a teacher, respected, lived in a nice area.
Right. So it really shook people to their core. Like, if someone like him could do this, then anyone could.
It really makes you wonder, how well can we ever know the people around us?
Right. If this seemingly normal guy could be capable of murder, it's a question we all have to ask ourselves.
Definitely. And as we go deeper into this case,
Mm.
we're going to see how this question really haunted Joan's family and the community.
Absolutely. And the fight for justice that followed, well, that's a whole other story.
I mean, I can't even imagine what Joan's family went through, but it's incredible that they were able to fight for justice, even in the midst of all that pain.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Tell me about Joan's mother, Rosemary.
Rosemary D'Alessandro, she's just, wow.
She turned her grief into action.
Absolutely. She knew McGowan's sentence, life, but with parole possible after 14 years, it wasn't enough.
Oh my God, 14 years.
That's all it was back then. Can you imagine?
Thinking that your child's killer could be walking free after just 14 years.
Horrible. The D'Alessandro family knew he was still dangerous.
They couldn't let that happen.
No.
Okay.
So Rosemary, she took charge, started this whole campaign for a new law.
What kind of law?
A law that would mean anyone who murders a child during a sexual assault, automatic life without parole.
That makes sense.
No.
I mean, how could you even think about releasing someone like that?
Exactly. And that's what Rosemary was fighting for.
It must have been a tough battle, though, right? Changing the law like that?
It was. But she never gave up. She worked with legislators, spoke at events, shared Joan's story everywhere.
Wow. So she was like a one-woman army.
Pretty much. And it worked. She got people from all sides to support her.
Because everyone could agree that kids need to be protected.
Right. And that's how Joan's Law was born.
It's an amazing legacy for Joan and for her mother's incredible strength.
Totally. It was passed first in New Jersey, and then, get this, it became federal law.
No way.
Yeah.
So now because of Rosemary, no other family has to worry about that happening.
Well, hopefully not. At least the law is there. McGowan would never get out, and others like him.
That's amazing.
Ooh.
It makes you think, though, if Joan's Law had existed before, maybe this whole tragedy could have been prevented.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, maybe McGowan would have thought twice if he knew he'd be in prison forever.
Right. It's like we can't change the past, but Joan's Law might prevent something like this from happening again.
Exactly. And it ties into what Douglas was talking about, about early intervention.
Right. Stopping something before it even starts.
He believed there were signs with McGowan long before the murder.
Like what? The anger, the narcissism we talked about?
All of that. If someone had noticed and done something, maybe.
It's hard to say for sure, but it makes you wonder.
It does. But that's the challenge, right? How do we spot those signs without, jumping to conclusions or judging people unfairly?
Yeah, you don't want to be suspicious of everyone.
Exactly. But we have to be aware and ready to act if we see something that's really concerning.
And that's what you were saying about the recidivism rate, right?
Right. How likely someone is to commit another crime.
And Douglas thought McGowan was high risk.
Oh, yeah. He was very clear about that. That's why what Rosemary did was so important.
She made sure McGowan would never hurt anyone again.
Exactly. And that's a powerful thing.
So it's kind of a bittersweet ending, I guess.
It is. This horrible tragedy led to a law that will protect others.
But it's still so sad what happened to Joan.
It is. And it reminds us that we have to be vigilant, to pay attention to those warning signs.
And to speak up if we see something that doesn't seem right. So we've covered a lot of ground here. This terrible murder, McGowan's twisted personality, Rosemary's fight for justice. But I guess, where do we go from here? Like, what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, for sure. But I think the big thing is, this case, it reminds us that evil can hide anywhere, even in plain sight.
Like, we can't just assume that bad guys look a certain way or act a certain way.
Exactly. McGowan, he was a teacher, someone parents trusted with their kids, but underneath, he was a monster.
It makes you think twice about who you trust, that's for sure. And it kind of makes Douglas's point about early intervention even more important.
Totally. Like, if we can learn to spot the warning signs, maybe we can prevent something like this from happening again.
The anger, the narcissism, all that.
Exactly. But it's tough, right? How do you do that without, being suspicious of everyone?
It's a fine line, for sure.
And then there's the whole question of, what do you do if you do see something? Who do you tell?
Right. It's not always clear.
And that's why I think what Rosemary did is so powerful. She didn't just sit back and grieve. She took action.
Joan's Law, that's her legacy.
Exactly. She made sure McGowan would never hurt anyone again. And hopefully it'll prevent other kids from going through what Joan did.
It's kind of hard to wrap my head around, though, this idea that some people, they just can't be rehabilitated.
Yeah, Douglas was pretty adamant about that, especially with McGowan. He saw him as a lost cause.
And that's what led to this whole push for life without parole.
Right. Because if you can't change someone, you have to protect society from them.
It's a tough call, but I guess that's the reality sometimes.
It is, but this case also shows us, that even out of something horrible, good can come.
Yeah, like Rosemary's activism, all the people she's helped with, Joan's Law. That's pretty amazing.
It is. It reminds us that we can make a difference. We don't have to just sit back and let these things happen.
We can fight for change, go out against injustice.
Exactly. We can honor Joan's memory by working to make the world a safer place.
That's a good note to end on, I think. So thanks again for being here, and thanks to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. It's been heavy, but important. And until next time, stay safe and stay aware.